In the scorched borderlands of the American Southwest, where blood and honor write history in the sand, destiny took an unexpected turn. A young Apache warrior cradles a dying U.S. cavalry soldier, their eyes meeting in a moment that would reshape the frontier. The soldier's last breath carries more than just his spirit. It carries his name, a gift that would become both shield and burden. This Apache boy, guided by ancestral wisdom, makes an extraordinary choice: to enter the world of the white man wearing that soldier's identity. As he rises through cavalry ranks, each act of courage bridges two worlds long, divided by mistrust and bloodshed. But how long can one man walk between two worlds before being forced to choose a side? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The setting sun painted the desert rocks blood red as private. Thomas Blackwood struggled for his final breaths. His blue cavalry uniform, now stained dark with desert dust and spreading crimson, lay heavy against his failing body. The young Apache warrior who held him had appeared like a spirit from the shadows, materializing after the skirmish had claimed the lives of Blackwood's entire patrol. In his fevered state, Blackwood saw not an enemy, but a fellow soul, young and untainted by the hatred that had brought him to this remote canyon. The boy's eyes held wisdom beyond his years, reflecting the dying light like polished obsidian. His gentle hands cradled Blackwood's head, offering comfort where there should have been contempt. "Water," Blackwood whispered, his parched lips barely moving. The Apache boy understood, bringing a clay vessel to the soldier's mouth. As he drank, Blackwood's trembling fingers found the cavalry insignia on his collar, the brass dulled by months of desert sun. "Your name," the boy spoke. In halting English, words learned from traders and scouts. "Tell me." Blackwood's mind drifted to his home in Virginia, to the family who would never know his fate. "Thomas," he managed, "Thomas Blackwood of the 4th Cavalry." His fingers worked at the insignia, pulling it free. "Take it. My father's before me. His father's before him." The Apache boy accepted the offering, understanding the weight of what was being passed to him. In his culture, such moments carried powerful medicine. The dying man's name, his very essence, was being offered as a sacred trust. "Why?" the boy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Blackwood's eyes found focus one last time. "Because I see in you what they never saw in us. The chance to be different." His body shuddered with the effort of speech. "Promise me. Promise you'll make it mean something." The boy spoke in his native tongue, a prayer to the spirits, then switched to English. "I promise, Thomas Blackwood, your name will live with honor." A ghost of a smile touched the soldier's lips. His free hand found the rosary in his pocket, worn smooth by years of worried prayers. He pressed it into the boy's palm, alongside the insignia. "Then perhaps there's hope after all." The last rays of sunlight caught the brass insignia as Blackwood's grip loosened. His eyes, now clear and peaceful, fixed on the distant horizon where the first stars were appearing. The Apache boy held him until the final breath escaped, until the body grew still in his arms. Standing slowly, the boy clutched both treasures, insignia and rosary, against his chest. He spoke again in his native tongue, a promise to the spirits and to the soul of Thomas Blackwood. This was no mere taking of a name. This was a sacred pact. He would enter the white man's world not as a spy or an enemy, but as a bridge between two peoples who had forgotten their common humanity. As darkness claimed the canyon, he began the solemn task of burial. Each stone placed was a prayer, each handful of earth a promise. When dawn came, there would be no trace of the skirmish, no sign of the death that had occurred here. Only a small cairn, marked with a cross fashioned from desert wood, would remain to commemorate the place where one soul had passed and another had been transformed. The boy who would become Thomas Blackwood took one last look at the cairn before disappearing into the gathering night. The weight of the insignia against his chest matched the weight of destiny now settling upon his shoulders. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, a sign from the spirits. His path was set, though where it would lead, not even the ancestors could say. Dawn had not yet touched the eastern sky when the boy reached his people's camp. The sacred eagle feather that marked him as a vision seeker still hung from his hair, though now it carried a different weight. Among his people, such feathers were earned through acts of bravery or wisdom. His had been gifted by the medicine man before his journey, a token of faith in the young warrior's quest for purpose. Smoke from dying fires drew thin lines against the stars as he moved silently between the sleeping lodges. Outside the medicine man's dwelling, Old Bear sat as if he had been waiting through the night, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. "You returned changed, Running River." The elder spoke the boy's birth name for what they both knew would be the last time. "The spirits have marked you." The boy, no longer Running River, but not yet fully Thomas Blackwood, knelt before his mentor. From his medicine pouch, he withdrew the cavalry insignia and rosary, laying them in the dust between them. Old Bear's eyes narrowed at the sight of the white man's tokens. "I have taken a name," the boy said in their language, each word chosen with care. The dying one gave it freely, with purpose. Old Bear lifted the insignia, studying how it caught. The pre-dawn light. "Names have power. To take a white man's name is to take his path." He set the piece of brass down with deliberate care. "Tell me what the spirits have shown you." And so the boy spoke of his vision quest, of how the eagle had led him to that blood-soaked canyon, of how the dying soldier had seen in him a bridge between worlds. As he spoke, more of the tribe awakened, gathering in a widening circle around them. Among them was his mother, her face a mask of concern and pride. "The old ones speak of a time before the hatred," Old Bear said when the boy had finished, "when different peoples could share the same lands, trade in peace." He picked up the rosary, letting the beads slip through his fingers. "But that time is long past. The white man's way is to change all they touch." "Perhaps," the boy replied, "that is why the spirits have chosen this path, to change them as they would change us." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Such words carried the weight of prophecy. Old Bear's expression remained unreadable as he studied the young warrior before him. Finally, he reached for his medicine bag and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in doeskin. "3 nights ago, I dreamed of this moment," the elder said, unwrapping the bundle to reveal sacred herbs and pigments. "The spirits showed me a warrior wearing 2 skins, walking 2 paths that became one. I did not understand then. Now I do." The medicine man began to mix the pigments with sacred oils, his gnarled fingers working with practiced precision. "If this is truly your path, you must be marked by both worlds. We will give you the protection of the ancestors before you take this white man's name." As the sun's first rays touched the eastern horizon, Old Bear began the ceremony. Sacred songs filled the air as he painted ancient symbols on the boy's chest and face, symbols of protection, of wisdom, of the eternal bond between a warrior and his people. The boy's mother stepped forward, removing the eagle feather from his hair. With tears in her eyes, she wove it into a new bracelet of leather and sinew. "Wear this hidden," she said, securing it around his wrist. "Let it remind you of who you are when you walk among them." The ceremony continued as the sun climbed higher. The tribe's warriors stepped forward one by one, each adding their own prayers and gifts, a stone for strength, a hawk's feather for vision, an arrowhead for protection. Last came Old Bear, who pressed a small medicine pouch into the boy's hands. "In this are the sacred herbs of our people," the elder said. "Each night, burn a small portion. Let the smoke carry your prayers to the ancestors. Let it remind you of the truth in your heart." His eyes held the boy's with fierce intensity. "You go to walk a dangerous path, one no one has walked before. Remember that you carry not just this white man's name, but the hopes of our people." The boy who would become Thomas Blackwood accepted each gift, each responsibility, feeling the weight of his choice settle deeper into his bones. As the ceremony drew to a close, he spoke his last words as Running River. "I will make both names. Proud," he promised, "the one I was born with, and the one I have been given." Old Bear nodded slowly. "Then go with our prayers, Thomas Blackwood. May your two paths lead us all to peace." In an abandoned trapper's cabin, high in the Mogollon rim, where pine forests met the desert's edge, Thomas Blackwood was being born again. The tattered journal lay open before him, its pages worn soft with handling. He had found it in the soldier's saddlebag, retrieved in secret from the canyon where their paths had crossed. Each page was a window into a world he would soon have, to inhabit as naturally as his own. "Dear Mother," he practiced aloud, matching the careful script before him. "The frontier is not what we imagined in Virginia." His finger traced each letter, his tongue working to shape the words as Thomas Blackwood would have spoken them. The accent was the hardest part, the way white men held their words in the front of their mouths, like birds ready to take flight. The cabin's single room had become a theater for his transformation. A broken mirror, salvaged from a burnt wagon, hung on the log wall. Before it, he would stand for hours, watching his face as he spoke, training his features to move as Thomas's. Had the real Thomas's handwriting offered clues to his nature, letters that flowed with educated grace, yet bore the occasional wild flourish of a young man's confidence. "I find myself questioning what Father always told us about these lands." He read from a dog-eared page, then paused, struck by the words that followed. "The people here are not the savages of our childhood tales. There is wisdom in their ways, if only we would see it." The irony of these words, written by the man, whose name he now carried, was not lost on him. He turned to a new entry. "Lieutenant Collins speaks of them as animals, but I've seen their children play, watched their mothers grieve. They love and fear and hope as we do. Surely there must be a way." The entry ended there, ink blotted by what might have been rain or tears. Thomas, the new Thomas, closed the journal carefully. Outside, wind stirred the pines, their whispers reminiscent of the sacred songs of his people. He moved to the cabin's small window, watching two worlds merge in the landscape below. Desert stretched endlessly southward, while behind him the mountains rose like ancient guardians. From beneath his shirt, he withdrew the eagle feather bracelet his mother had woven. Its presence against his skin was a constant reminder of who he had been, who he still was in his heart. But the man in the mirror now spoke with a Virginia accent, wrote letters in flowing script, and knew the prayers that accompanied the rosary. Beads. A sound outside snapped him to attention, horses approaching. He moved silently to the cabin's rear window, becoming once again the warrior who could read the language of the land. Two riders, cavalry by their silhouettes, probably a patrol from Fort Apache. They were following the old trapper's trail that passed within 100 yards of his sanctuary. Thomas quickly but methodically gathered the journal and his practice papers, sliding them beneath a loose floorboard. Then he took his position in the shadows, watching, evaluating. The patrol passed without turning toward the cabin, their voices carrying on the wind, discussing women at the fort, complaining about the coffee. Every word was a lesson, each inflection carefully noted and stored away. When they had gone, he retrieved the journal, turning to its final entry. The pages here were still crisp, unweathered by time. "I wonder if any man can truly understand another until he has walked in his place, seen through his eyes. Perhaps that is what these territories need. Men who can bridge the divide, who can speak to both sides of this conflict. If I live to complete this patrol." The words ended there, the rest of the page blank. Thomas touched the empty space gently, feeling the weight of inheritance in that unfinished thought. In the coming days, he would continue his preparation, practicing his signature until it matched the one in the journal, memorizing the details of Virginia that peppered the entries, learning to move and speak and think as Thomas Blackwood had. But in the quiet moments, between the practice and preparation, he found himself adding his own thoughts to the journal's blank pages, writing first in his native tongue, then translating to English. Two voices emerging from the same hand, two worldviews merging into something new. Like the land outside his window, where desert met forest, he was becoming a place where worlds could meet and transform. Fort Verde rose from the desert like a geometric mirage, its adobe walls bleached. Pale under the Arizona sun, Thomas approached on foot, his newly acquired civilian clothes dust-covered from the journey. The enlistment papers in his satchel felt like hot coals against his side, documents painstakingly forged from studying the original Thomas's journal. Each stroke of the pen a prayer that they would withstand scrutiny. At the fort's gate, two sentries straightened from their lounging positions. Thomas forced himself to walk with the easy confidence of a man returning to familiar territory, though his heart drummed a war rhythm beneath his ribs. "State your business," the older sentry called out, hand resting casually on his holstered revolver. "Thomas Blackwood, formerly of the 4th Cavalry," he replied, the Virginia accent flowing smooth as creek water, "seeking to re-enlist after recovery from wounds sustained in Apache territory." The younger sentry's eyes narrowed. "Blackwood thought that patrol went missing 3 months back." "All but me," Thomas said, letting genuine sadness color his voice. "Found by traders, nursed back at the mission near Tucson." The story was carefully crafted from details in the real Thomas's journal. The mission had been mentioned several times as a place of refuge for wounded soldiers. The older sentry, Sergeant Mills by his insignia, studied him with weathered eyes. "You'll need to speak with Captain Reynolds. He's handling recruitment since Lieutenant Potter took that arrow last month." Thomas nodded, noting how the casual mention of violence was meant to test his reaction. He kept his face neutral, showing neither fear nor excessive interest. The real Thomas had written of such subtle challenges, how old soldiers measured new ones through small observations. Inside the fort's walls, life moved with military precision. Thomas followed Sergeant Mills past the parade ground where cavalry mounts were being exercised, past the mess hall where the smell of coffee and bacon lingered. Each step was a negotiation between worlds, moving like a soldier while maintaining the heightened awareness that had kept him alive in Apache territory. Captain Reynolds's office was sparse and functional, distinguished only by a map of the territories spread across one wall. The captain himself was a compact man with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much frontier justice. "Blackwood, you say?" Reynolds studied the enlistment papers. "Virginia boy, if I recall the records correctly." "Yes, sir. Charlottesville." Thomas stood at parade rest, exactly as the journal had described. "Interesting timing, your return." Reynolds set the papers aside. "We've had increased Apache activity in the sector where your patrol went missing. Wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" The question carried hidden barbs. Thomas met the captain's gaze steadily. "Only what I saw before taking an arrow in the shoulder, sir. Lost consciousness after that. The traders who found me said it was a miracle I survived the blood loss." Reynolds leaned back, fingers drumming on his desk. "Show me." Without hesitation, Thomas unbuttoned his shirt collar, revealing the scar he had carefully cultivated over the past months, a knife wound deliberately placed and allowed to heal ugly, matching the location described in the real Thomas's last journal entries. The captain's eyes softened slightly. "Nasty business, that. Your previous commander wrote good things about your horsemanship and rifle work. We could use both, especially now." He pulled a fresh document from his desk. "Assuming the post surgeon clears you, welcome back to the 4th Cavalry, Private Blackwood." Thomas allowed himself a small smile of gratitude. "Thank you, sir. It's good to be home." The word home caught in his throat, carrying more meaning than the captain could know. As he left the office with his new orders, Thomas touched the eagle feather bracelet hidden beneath his sleeve. 2 homes now, 2 loyalties, and a path between them that grew clearer with each step. Behind him, he heard Reynolds mutter to his clerk, "Send word to Division Command. Let them know we've got one of our lost sheep back in the fold." Thomas walked out into the sunlight of the parade ground, his boots raising small puffs of dust with each step. Above him, an eagle circled against the brilliant blue sky. A sign from the spirits, perhaps, or simply a reminder that in nature, as in life, survival often meant learning to soar between different heights. The small brass mirror caught the light of the quarter moon as Thomas studied his reflection in the barracks shadows. Each morning and night, this ritual grounded him in his adopted identity. The mirror, traded for 2 days' pay from a traveling merchant, had become both tool and talisman. In its slightly tarnished surface, he watched Thomas Blackwood emerge more fully with each passing day. "Blackwood, you planning to admire yourself all night?" The voice belonged to Private James Cooper, a gangly youth from Pennsylvania who had claimed the bunk next to Thomas's. "Some of us are trying to sleep here." "Just checking this shoulder wound," Thomas replied, using the Virginia drawl that now came almost naturally. "Still gives me trouble sometimes." Cooper sat up, suddenly interested. "That Apache arrow wound? Tell me about it again. Did you really crawl 3 miles with it stuck in you?" The story had grown with each telling, as stories did among soldiers. Thomas had carefully crafted it from pieces of real experiences, both his own and those recorded in the original Thomas's journal. "Not much to tell that you haven't heard," he deflected, tucking the mirror away. "Memories still spotty from the blood loss." In truth, the memory of that day was crystal clear, the real Thomas Blackwood dying in his arms, the sacred transfer of name and purpose. But here in the fort, such truth would be more dangerous than any lie. The barracks settled into night. Sounds, snoring, the creak of rope beds, distant coyotes calling to the moon. Thomas lay back, one hand absently touching the eagle feather bracelet hidden beneath his sleeve. In the dark, he could feel both of his selves coexisting. The Apache, warrior studying his enemies from within, and the cavalry soldier slowly earning their trust. Dawn came early at Fort Verde. Thomas rose before the bugle, as he had been taught by his people, using the quiet moments to center himself. The morning inspection brought a new challenge. The post surgeon, Dr. Harrison, had requested his presence at the infirmary. "Routine examination," the doctor said, gesturing for Thomas to remove his shirt. "Captain Reynolds wants all recovered wounded cleared for full duty." Thomas complied, his heart steady despite the risk. He had prepared for this, knew every detail of the wound that should be there. The real scar tissue had been earned through careful manipulation, a mixture of his people's healing knowledge and deliberate aggravation of the wound to match the expected pattern. Dr. Harrison's fingers probed the scar professionally. "Arrow wounds usually leave a cleaner mark," he mused. "This is rather ragged." "The traders who found me had to cut it out," Thomas explained, using the story he had rehearsed countless times. "Not exactly surgical conditions," the doctor hummed, thoughtfully making notes in his ledger. "And these other scars? Quite a collection for a young man." Thomas felt a chill despite the warm morning. Some of the marks on his body were from his warrior training, others from battles that the real Thomas Blackwood had never seen. "Rough country out here, sir, not all from military service." Harrison's eyes lingered on a ritual scar near Thomas's collarbone, one that any Apache would recognize as a warrior's mark. But the white man's gaze slid past its significance, seeing only the random violence of frontier life. "Well, everything seems to have healed properly," the doctor concluded, "though I'd recommend exercises to maintain flexibility in that shoulder. Wouldn't want it stiffening up at the wrong moment." Released from the infirmary, Thomas walked the parade ground, acknowledging salutes from passing soldiers. 3 weeks into his deception, he was becoming known as a quiet, competent trooper, the kind others trusted to do his duty without complaint. It was a reputation that would serve his deeper purpose. In the stables, where he had volunteered. For extra duties, Thomas found moments of peace. Horses didn't care about a man's identity. They judged by touch and intention. His people's way with horses had translated perfectly to cavalry work, earning him silent approval from the stable. "Master, you've got a gift, Blackwood," Sergeant Mills commented, watching Thomas gentle a particularly spirited mount. "Not many men can read a horse like that." Thomas allowed himself a small smile. "My father taught me," he said, which was true enough. Though his father had taught him Apache horse wisdom, not the Virginia plantation skills implied by his words. The sergeant nodded approvingly. "Keep it up, and you might find yourself moving up the ranks. Army always needs good horsemen." Later, as sunset painted the adobe walls gold, Thomas stood at attention for retreat, the flag-lowering ceremony that marked each day's end. As the bugle called and the colors descended, he felt the weight of his dual existence. In his heart, he spoke his people's prayers, while his lips moved silently along with the white man's ritual. The mirror in his quarters would reflect one face, but his soul knew both, and somehow, impossibly, they were becoming the same man. Dawn painted the Dragoon Mountains in shades of blood and gold when the Apache war party struck. Thomas had sensed them long before, reading signs his fellow cavalry troops rode past without notice. Disturbed rocks, a hawk's sudden flight pattern, the subtle shifting of morning shadows. But to warn the patrol too early would raise questions no one was ready to answer. The cavalry saber at his hip was still untested, issued just 2 days prior. Now, as rifle fire erupted from the rocks above, that blade would prove whether he truly belonged among the blue-clad soldiers of Fort Verde. "Ambush, 3 o'clock high!" Sergeant Mills's voice cut through the chaos. "Dismount and take cover!" Thomas reacted with the fluid grace of both his traditions, Apache warrior and cavalry soldier moving as one. He guided his horse behind a boulder with subtle knee pressure, then slipped to the ground in a motion that spoke of years in the saddle. Around him, other troopers scrambled for position, some moving with practiced ease, others showing the panic of their first real fight. Private Cooper, the young Pennsylvanian, had frozen in his saddle. Thomas saw the telltale glint of a rifle barrel tracking the boy from the ridgeline above. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, yanking Cooper from his mount just as a shot cracked through the morning air. "Stay down," Thomas ordered, his Virginia accent holding steady even now. "Watch the rocks, not the flashes. The shooter will move after each shot." Cooper nodded, eyes wide but focusing. Thomas had been teaching him tracking skills during their patrols, never revealing their true source. Now those lessons might keep the boy alive. From his position, Thomas could read the flow of battle in a way few others could. He recognized the attack pattern. It was one his own people used when facing superior numbers. The war party wasn't trying to wipe them out. They were herding the patrol toward a box canyon where a larger force waited. "Sergeant Mills!" Thomas called out, pitching his voice to carry through the gunfire. "They're pushing us east. Canyon ahead's likely blocked." Mills turned sharply, studying Thomas's face. "You sure about that, Blackwood?" "Yes, sir. Seen this before." He pointed to a narrow gap in the rocks to their south. "That wash leads to open ground. If we punch through there, we can flank their position." The sergeant hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Cooper, Martinez, Davidson, lay down covering fire. Rest of you, prepare to move on my mark. Blackwood, you're on point since you seem to know the ground." Thomas led them through the wash, every sense alert for signs of counter-movement. Above, his cavalry saber clinked softly against his saddle as they moved, its rhythm matching his heartbeat. The real test would come in the next few minutes. He would have to strike a delicate balance between success and restraint. The wash opened onto a scrub-covered slope that offered a clear view of the war party's position. Thomas counted at least 15 warriors, their attention fixed on the cavalry troopers still trading fire in the main ravine. Among them, he recognized faces from his own clan, though time and distance had made them strangers. "On my command, Mills whispered, positioning his men. "Aim to wound if you can. Captain wants prisoners for questioning." Thomas raised his carbine with the others, sighting along its barrel at men who might once have called him brother. His finger found the trigger, but in his mind he was already planning how to ensure that his shots would drive them away without causing death. The fight, when it came, was swift and decisive. The war party, caught between two forces, melted away into the rocks with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. Thomas led the pursuit just long enough to make it look convincing before calling out, "They're moving too fast, Sergeant. Ground's too broken for the horses up there." Mills reined in, wiping dust from his face. "Damn good eye you've got, Blackwood. Both for spotting their trap and finding our way around it. Could have lost half the patrol in that canyon." Later, at evening muster, Captain Reynolds himself called Thomas forward. "Sergeant Mills speaks highly of your actions today," the captain said, his weathered face betraying a hint of approval. "Says you've got a natural feel for Apache tactics." "Just observation, sir," Thomas replied carefully. "Man learns to read sign out here, or he doesn't last long." Reynolds nodded slowly. "Keep reading it that well, Private, and you won't be a private much longer." He gestured to the saber at Thomas's hip. "You earned that blade today. Make sure you keep earning it." Thomas touched the saber's hilt, feeling the weight of both victory and deception. "Yes, sir. I aim to." The peace pipe lay broken in the dust, its carved soapstone bowl cracked cleanly in two. Thomas stared at it, seeing in its severed form a reflection of his own divided soul. Just hours ago, it had been whole, passed between hands at a meeting that had promised hope. Now, like so many attempts at peace before it, it lay shattered in the wake of violence. The raid had come at false dawn, when the eastern sky was still more promise than light. Thomas had been on sentry duty, his position on the fort's western wall giving him a clear view of the desert beyond. He saw them coming. Of course he did. The signs were there for those who knew to look. The sudden silence of night birds, the shifting patterns in the sage grass, the way the starlight caught fleetingly on metal. But this time, recognition brought more than tactical advantage. Among the approaching shadows, he caught glimpses of familiar movement, the distinctive way Grey Wolf's son carried his rifle, the slight limp in Standing Bear's gait from an old hunting wound. These were not just Apache warriors. They were his own people, men he had known since childhood. "Riders approaching," he called out, his voice carrying the prescribed warning even as his heart clenched. "West perimeter." The fort erupted into practiced chaos. Thomas watched his fellow soldiers scramble to defensive positions, knowing that his warning had come just early enough to prevent the raiders from gaining their full advantage, but late enough to seem natural for a cavalry sentry. "How many?" Captain Reynolds appeared beside him, telescope in hand. 20, maybe 25, Thomas reported, deliberately undercounting. "Moving fast." The first shots cracked through the pre-dawn stillness. Thomas recognized the sound of Grey Wolf's old Springfield rifle, a distinctive report he'd known since boyhood. He returned fire with careful precision, aiming to drive back rather than kill, each shot a prayer that his people would recognize the pattern and understand. "Blackwood!" Reynolds's voice cut through the gunfire. "Take Cooper and Martinez, circle behind through the wash, cut off their retreat to the hills." It was an order that would bring him face to face with his past. "Yes, sir." The three riders thundered through the desert darkness, hooves kicking up dust that hung in the air like ghost trails. Thomas led them along a route he knew would intersect with the raiders' likely escape path, but also one that would give the Apache warriors plenty of warning of their approach. They rounded a bend in the wash to find themselves suddenly confronted by 4 warriors who had stayed behind to cover their brother's retreat. In the growing light, Thomas found himself staring directly into the eyes of Running Deer, his childhood friend. Time seemed to suspend itself. In that moment of recognition, Thomas saw Running Deer's eyes widen, saw the subtle shift in his posture that spoke of shocked understanding. The warrior's hand moved toward his weapon, then stopped as Thomas made the smallest of gestures. Childhood signal they had once used in their hunting games. "Hold your fire!" Thomas shouted to Cooper and Martinez, his voice carrying both command and warning to all present. "They're just scouts. The main party's already gone." Running deers. Face remained impassive, but his eyes held questions that would demand answers. With deliberate slowness, he raised his empty hand, then gestured to his companions. The warriors melted away into the rocks with fluid grace, leaving behind only dust and uncertainty. "We should pursue," Martinez said, his carbine still trained. "On the spot where the Apache had vanished." Thomas shook his head. "Ground's too broken up ahead, more likely to break our horses' legs than catch them." He turned his mount, hoping his face didn't betray the storm of emotions beneath his calm exterior. "Besides, they were just testing our defenses. They'll be back." When they returned to the fort, they found the broken peace pipe in the dust. Near the western wall, a message left deliberately for Thomas to find. It had belonged to Old Bear, carried to many failed negotiations. Its destruction spoke volumes in a language few there could read. That night, alone in the barracks, Thomas unwrapped the eagle feather bracelet from his wrist. In the faint moonlight, he studied the intricate weaving his mother had crafted, each strand a reminder of who he was and who he was becoming. With careful movements, he rewove a loose strand, just as he would need to reweave the trust that had been frayed this day. Running deer would speak to the others. Questions would be asked. The time was coming when he would have to reveal his deeper purpose to both his peoples. But for now, like the broken pipe in his saddlebag, he carried the weight of division and the hope of future mending. The silver medal caught the campfire's light, its surface still untarnished. Captain Reynolds had presented it that morning, a commendation for exceptional service in the advancement of peace on the frontier. Thomas studied its engravings, fingers tracing the words that told only half the story of how 37 lives had been saved at Medicine Rocks. "Still admiring your hardware, Blackwood." Sergeant Mills settled beside him, offering a tin cup of coffee. "You earned it fair and square." Thomas accepted the coffee, tucking the medal away. "Just thinking about how close it came, sir." "Close? Indeed." Mills gazed into the fire. "Never seen anything like it. One minute we're about to have a bloodbath, next minute you're talking them down in their own tongue." The memory was still fresh. A patrol stumbling upon an Apache hunting party near Medicine Rocks. Both sides had drawn weapons, fingers tight on triggers, when Thomas recognized the hunters' markings. They were from Grey Wolf's band, the same group from the raid 2 months earlier. In that moment of crisis, Thomas had made a decision that could have ended in either glory or a firing squad. He had stepped forward, hands raised, and spoken in Apache, not the broken trader's pidgin that soldiers sometimes learned, but the pure ceremonial language of his people. "I speak with 2 tongues, but 1 heart," he had said, using the formal phrases of parley. "The rocks of this place have seen enough blood." The Apache warriors had been startled, not just by his words, but by his accent, which marked him as one who had learned the language in childhood. Their leader, a warrior Thomas had known as Swift Fox, had lowered his rifle first. What followed was a delicate dance of diplomacy. Thomas had translated for both sides, carefully navigating the complex protocols of both cultures. He explained to Captain Reynolds that the hunting party was following sacred traditions, tracking buffalo that had wandered into their ancestral grounds. To the Apache, he conveyed the cavalry's mission to protect settlers who had been raided further north. Raids, he knew, that had been conducted by a different band. "The captain says you knew things about their customs no white man should know," Mills mused, interrupting Thomas's thoughts. "Says you must have spent time with them during your recovery after the arrow wound." Thomas sipped his coffee, using the moment to compose his response. "The mission near Tucson," he said carefully. "They had an old Apache woman who helped tend the wounded. She taught me some things, seemed useful to learn." Mills nodded slowly. Useful is an understatement. That knowledge just saved a lot of lives on both sides. He stood, stretching. Captain's putting you up for corporal. Says we need more men who can think before they shoot. After the sergeant left, Thomas pulled out the medal again. Its weight reminded him of another piece of silver, the earring his father had worn as a marker of his status as a peace chief. Both objects carried the burden of bridging worlds. The medicine pouch at his hip held a small piece of paper, a message passed to him secretly by Swift Fox during the negotiations. Written in careful Apache symbols, it requested a meeting with Old Bear at the next full moon. Thomas's actions at Medicine Rocks had opened a door, but walking through it would require even greater care. He thought of the broken peace pipe, now carefully wrapped and carried in his saddlebag. Perhaps it was time for mending, not just the pipe, but the trust it represented. His finger traced the medal's edge, remembering Old Bear's words. Sometimes the spirits break things so we can rebuild them stronger. The fort's bugle sounded evening retreat, its notes carrying across the desert wind. Thomas stood, pinning the medal to his uniform with deliberate care. Each small victory, each life saved, each moment of understanding between his peoples was another step on the path the dying soldier had set him upon. In his heart, he offered prayers to both the Christian God and the Apache spirits, asking for guidance in the days ahead. The silver medal caught the last light of day, transforming it into a bright promise, or perhaps a warning, of what was yet to come. The medicine pouch felt heavier than usual against Thomas's hip as he crossed the fort's courtyard. Inside, two worlds mingled. Dried sage and willow bark from his people's healing traditions lay alongside army-issued quinine tablets and bandages. Like everything in his life now, even healing required a careful balance between two traditions. Corporal Blackwood? Sarah Reynolds' voice caught him mid-stride. The captain's daughter stood in the doorway of the infirmary, her dark hair caught in the late afternoon light. Dr. Harrison asked if you could spare a moment. Thomas had been avoiding the infirmary and Sarah since treating the fever-stricken settlers 3 days ago. His knowledge of Apache medicine had saved 4 lives, but it had also raised questions he wasn't ready to answer, especially from someone whose bright eyes seemed to see too much. "Of course, Miss Reynolds," he replied, maintaining the formal distance expected between a corporal and an officer's daughter. But as he followed her inside, he caught the faint scent of lavender, a luxury on the frontier that somehow suited her perfectly. Dr. Harrison looked up from his desk, surrounded by papers covered in his cramped medical notations. "Ah, Blackwood. Been meaning to ask you about those herbal preparations you used on the Miller family. Remarkable results. Where did you say you learned that?" Thomas touched his medicine pouch, choosing his words carefully. "The mission near Tucson," he said, using his standard explanation. "The old Apache woman there." Yes, Harrison interrupted, "but I've corresponded with that mission. They've never had an Apache healer there." The doctor's eyes held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. In fact, their records show no Thomas Blackwood ever being treated there. The room seemed to grow smaller. Thomas felt Sarah's presence behind him, sensed her attention sharpen at this revelation. His fingers brushed the eagle feather bracelet beneath his sleeve, drawing strength from its familiar texture. "I may have misremembered the location," he said slowly. "Those days after the arrow wound are unclear." Harrison nodded sympathetically, but Sarah stepped forward. "Like your accent," she said softly. "Sometimes it slips just a little, especially when you're tired or distracted." Thomas met her gaze, seeing not suspicion, but something more dangerous, understanding. In the weeks since her arrival from Boston to assist in the infirmary, they had worked together often. She had watched him with the sick and injured, seen how he moved between worlds of medicine as naturally as breathing. "The fever bark you used," she continued. "It wasn't just willow. There was something else, something that brought the fevers." Down faster than anything Dr. Harrison had seen. Something you don't want to explain. Sarah, Harrison warned, but she pressed on. And 2 nights ago, when the Apache drums were sounding in the hills, you weren't just listening to them. You were understanding them. Thomas felt the weight of his dual existence pressing down like a physical burden. The medicine pouch at his hip seemed to burn with its mixed contents, each herb and remedy a testament to his divided soul. "Miss Reynolds," he began, but she shook her head. "I've seen how you look at the horizon sometimes," she said, her voice gentle, "like you're caught between 2 worlds. And I've seen how you heal, not just bodies, but the rifts between people. Whatever your secrets are, they're saving lives." Harrison cleared his throat. "What my young colleague is trying to say, Corporal, is that perhaps there are some questions better left unasked, especially when the answers might complicate an otherwise valuable arrangement." Thomas studied them both. The old doctor with his practical wisdom, the young woman with her dangerous perception. In Sarah's eyes, he saw something that made his carefully maintained balance shift, not just understanding, but acceptance. "The herbs," he said finally, "are ancient knowledge. Whether they come from mission healers or Apache medicine people, does it matter if they work?" "No," Sarah replied, stepping closer. "Just as it doesn't matter why a man might choose to walk between 2 worlds, if his path helps build a bridge between them, the moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities." Then Harrison coughed pointedly, and the professional distance reasserted itself. "Well then," the doctor said briskly, "perhaps you could show us how to prepare some of these remedies properly. For the medical records, of course." Later, as sunset painted the fort's walls in shades of gold and shadow, Thomas found Sarah walking the parade ground. She fell into step beside him, their silence comfortable with new understanding. "Your secret is safe," she said finally, "though I suspect I've only glimpsed its edges." Thomas touched his medicine pouch, feeling the weight of both its contents and her words. "Secrets are like wounds," he replied softly. "Some need to be cleaned and bound, others need to heal in their own time." She smiled, and for a moment the burden of his double life felt lighter. "Then, perhaps," she said, "we can work on the healing together." The torn photograph lay between them like an open wound. Cooper's hands trembled as he held his rifle trained on Thomas, the weapon unsteady but close enough that accuracy wouldn't matter. In the dim light of the stable's lantern, the image was clearly visible. The real Thomas Blackwood, standing proud in his Virginia home. His pale features a stark contrast to the man who now bore his name. "How long have you known?" Thomas asked, quietly, making no move to defend himself. The night air carried the scent of hay and horses, along with the distant sounds of the fort's evening routine. "Since Medicine Rocks," Cooper replied, his young face twisted with confusion and betrayal. "The way you spoke their language, not just words, but the old ways. No mission healer taught you that." He nudged the photograph with his boot. "Found this in the quartermaster's records. The real Blackwood's family sent it after they learned his patrol was lost." Thomas studied his friend's face, seeing not hatred but hurt. Cooper had been his shadow for months, eager to learn tracking and survival skills. In teaching him, Thomas had found something he hadn't expected. A brother in spirit, if not in blood. "The man in that photograph died with honor," Thomas said carefully. "I was there. I held him as he passed." "You're Apache." It wasn't a question. "All this time you've been, spying on us." "If I were a spy, how many soldiers would be dead now? How many raids would have succeeded?" Thomas kept his voice low, steady. "I took his name because he asked me to, because he saw a chance. For something different." Cooper's rifle wavered. "The captain trusts you, Sarah." His voice caught. "Does she know?" "She suspects something. But no, she doesn't know everything." Thomas thought of Sarah, of their shared moments in the infirmary, of understanding offered without demands. Few people could handle knowing. "Like me?" Bitterness crept into Cooper's tone. "The fool you've been laughing at behind my back?" "No," Thomas said sharply. "The friend I've tried to keep alive. Everything I taught you, tracking, healing, reading the land, it was all real. That knowledge has saved lives on both sides." The rifle lowered slightly as confusion warred with anger on Cooper's face. "Why are you telling me this? I could shoot you right now, or call the guard." "Because you're not just my friend," Thomas replied. "You're the kind of soldier the real Thomas Blackwood was, one who can see beyond divisions. That's why I've taught you what I have, why I'm trusting you now." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft nickering of horses. Finally, Cooper lowered his rifle completely. "Show me," he said. Thomas slowly reached for his medicine pouch, drawing out the cavalry insignia that had started his journey. "He gave me this, along with his name. Said I might be able to do what he couldn't, help both sides see each other as people." Cooper stared at the insignia, recognition dawning. That patrol, they said everyone was killed by hostiles. They were killed by fear and misunderstanding. The same things that keep filling graveyards on both sides. Thomas held out the insignia. "I'm trying to change that, but I need help." Cooper took the insignia, turning it over in his hands. "If anyone finds out, then we both hang," Thomas finished simply. "But if we succeed, fewer sons will die in this desert, fewer mothers will mourn on both sides." The young soldier looked up, his face showing the first signs of understanding. "The raids that failed, the peace talks that succeeded, that was all you. It was us. Every soldier who chose to think before shooting, every warrior who gave peace a chance. I just helped them find common ground." Cooper handed back the insignia, then slowly reached down and picked up the photograph. With deliberate care, he tore it in half, then quarters, then threw the pieces into the lantern's flame. "Teach me more," he said as they watched the image burn. "Not just tracking and healing. Teach me to understand them like you do. The real, them." Thomas felt something shift inside him, a weight lifting even as a new responsibility settled in its place. "It won't be easy. You'll have to unlearn as much as you learn." "A good thing I've got a good teacher, then?" Cooper managed a weak smile. "Though I still say your Virginia accent needs work." In the darkness of the stable, two men who had begun as enemies became friends and were now becoming brothers, watched the last traces of an old identity turn to ash. The truth between them would be both burden and bridge, much like the name Thomas carried. The treaty document lay unrolled on Captain Reynolds's desk, its crisp army letterhead contrasting with the ancient symbols drawn in the margins. Thomas stood at attention, watching as Old Bear carefully added another sacred sign beneath his X-mark signature. Each stroke of the charcoal carried meaning that went far beyond the English words typed above. "Explain it to me again," Reynolds said. To Thomas, "What he's drawing there." "It's a medicine wheel, sir," Thomas replied, while Cooper stood quietly by the door, watching and learning. 4 quarters for the 4 directions, each with its own meaning. By adding it to his mark, he's binding his people to this agreement through their oldest laws. The captain nodded slowly. "And you're certain about these terms? The Apache scouts will really work alongside our patrols?" "They already do, sir," Cooper spoke up, catching Thomas's subtle nod of approval. "They're the ones who helped us prevent the Murphy Ranch raid last week." It had been 3 months since Cooper discovered Thomas's secret, 3 months of careful groundwork. Together, they had begun building a network of understanding. Apache scouts who wanted peace, soldiers willing to learn, settlers who saw the value of cooperation. The treaty before them now was just the formal recognition of what they'd already proven could work. "It's more than just scouts," Thomas added. "They're offering to share their knowledge of the territory, their healing ways." He touched his medicine pouch, thinking of Sarah working in the infirmary, already incorporating Apache remedies into her practice. "Both sides have something to teach, sir, and to learn." Old Bear spoke in his native tongue, his weathered face showing both wisdom and wariness. Thomas translated carefully, carrying the weight of both languages. He says the seeds of peace are like the desert flowers. They wait beneath the surface until the conditions are right, then bloom all at once. But they must be tended, protected from the harsh sun and rough winds. Reynolds studied the old chief, and thoughtfully, "Poetic, but practical too, I suppose. These joint patrols, they'll help prevent misunderstandings, like what almost happened at Medicine Rocks?" "Yes, sir," Cooper confirmed. "When our men ride with their scouts, they learn to rid the land through Apache eyes, and the Apache warriors see that not all bluecoats carry hatred in their hearts." Thomas felt a surge of pride in his friend's words. Cooper had taken to the role of bridge builder with unexpected dedication. His genuine curiosity about Apache ways had helped convince other soldiers that there was no shame in learning from their former enemies. Old Bear added another symbol to the document, an eagle with outstretched wings. Thomas recognized it as the mark of protection, a powerful medicine rarely granted to outsiders. "He offers his personal guarantee," Thomas translated. "Any soldier riding with his scouts will be under his protection, and any Apache working with the fort will have your protection, sir." Reynolds picked up his pen, adding his own signature. Beneath the native marks, "Your wounds have healed well," he said to Old Bear through Thomas. "Our doctor speaks highly of your medicine people's knowledge." It had been a calculated risk, bringing injured Apache to the fort's infirmary, but Sarah had championed the idea, arguing that healing could build trust where words failed. Now, Apache healers regularly consulted with Dr. Harrison, each side enriching the other's understanding. "The old ones speak of a time," Old Bear replied in Apache, his eyes meeting Thomas's with knowing wisdom, "when a warrior might carry two medicines in his heart and be stronger for it. Perhaps those days are returning." Thomas translated the words while feeling their truth in his bones. His own double life had become a template for this new way of thinking. Where once he had feared discovery, now he saw his dual nature as a gift, one that could help others bridge the same divide. Cooper stepped forward, offering the chief a canteen of water to wash the charcoal from his hands. The gesture, simple but respectful, showed how far the young soldier had come from his early days of frontier prejudice. "Tell him," Cooper said to Thomas, "that I look forward to riding with his scouts, to learning their ways." As Thomas translated, he saw approval flash in Old Bear's eyes. The chief reached into his medicine bag and pulled out a small carved fetish, a bear in turquoise. He pressed it into Cooper's hand. "For the one who learns to see with new eyes," Thomas translated. "Bear medicine for strength on a difficult path." The treaty document was rolled carefully, sealed with both army formality and Apache ceremony. But the real agreement, Thomas knew, was written in moments like these, in shared water, exchanged medicines, and the slow growth of trust between former enemies. Later, as they walked the fort's walls beneath a star-filled sky, Cooper touched the turquoise bear at his neck. "Think it will last?" he asked quietly. "This peace we're building?" Thomas watched the distant flames of Apache fires dancing in the hills. "Peace is like the desert plants you've learned to find," he said. "Some roots go deep, even when you can't see them. Our job is to keep tending them, no matter what storms may come." The blood-stained bandana fluttered between them like a terrible flag of truce. Thomas held it aloft, standing in no man's land. Between the angry forces, cavalry troops to his back, Apache warriors before him, and a family of settlers caught in the middle. The morning sun cast long shadows across the canyon floor, where a simple misunderstanding threatened to unravel. Months of careful peace-building. "They're stealing our horses!" Young Billy Matthews shouted from behind the family's overturned wagon. "Shot Pa when he tried to stop 'em." "They're our horses," came the answering cry in Apache from Swift Fox's 17-year-old son. "Stolen from our grazing lands last moon." Thomas felt the weight of every weapon trained on the space where he stood. Cooper edged closer, ignoring Lieutenant Warner's harsh command to hold position. "The boy's right," Thomas called out in both languages, his voice carrying the authority he'd earned from both sides. These horses were stolen, but not by who you think. He could see Sarah kneeling beside Mr. Matthews behind the wagon, her capable hands working to stem the bleeding from his shoulder wound. The man's face was grey with pain and anger, but he lived. The situation balanced on a knife's edge between violence and understanding. "Explain yourself, Corporal," Warner demanded, his drawn revolver reflecting morning light. Thomas switched to English, pitching his voice for all to hear. "These horses bear the Matthews brand, yes, but look closer." He pointed to marks barely visible beneath. "There's older brands beneath, Apache symbols. Horse thieves have been working both sides, stealing from one to sell to the other." Cooper moved to the nearest horse, running his hand along its flank. "He's right, sir. I recognize these marks from our training. They're from Swift Fox's herd." Sarah's voice carried from behind the wagon. "Mr. Matthews, is it true you bought these horses from traders last month?" The wounded settler grimaced. 3 men said they'd found them wild in the hills, offered a fair price." Swift Fox's son spoke rapidly in Apache, and Thomas translated, "The same traders attacked our herders, took 24 horses. We've been tracking them for weeks." The tension began to shift, redirecting itself from ancient hatreds toward a common enemy. Warner lowered his revolver slightly. "These traders, you can describe them." As details were exchanged in both languages, Thomas watched understanding dawn on both sides. The bandana in his hands, his own, bloodied from where he'd used it to bind Matthew's wound, became a different kind of symbol. Not of division, but of shared injury and common cause. "Those bastards played us against each other," Cooper said, anger clear in his voice. "Probably been doing it all along the territory." Swift Fox's son, Whitehawk, dismounted slowly. In careful English learned from the joint patrols, he addressed Matthews directly. "Your blood was shed over our horses. This makes you family in our way." Sarah caught Thomas's eye, a small smile of pride crossing her face. She had been teaching the young warrior English during his recovery from a snake bite last month. Now those lessons bore unexpected fruit. "Family?" Matthews's wife emerged from behind the wagon, her face a mix of fear and hope. "But we all thought we knew who our enemies were," Thomas said, letting the bloodied bandana fall to the dust between the groups. "Maybe it's time we learned who our friends are instead." Warner holstered his revolver with deliberate care. "The fort's been getting reports of horse thieves working the territory. Settlers and Apache both complaining, but we never put it together." He turned to Swift Fox's warriors. "Work with us. Help us find these men." Whitehawk translated for his father, who nodded slowly. Swift Fox himself stepped forward, speaking through Thomas. "We will track them together. Show how the peace treaty makes us all stronger." The next hours transformed potential bloodshed into purposeful cooperation. Sarah treated both Matthews's wound and a cut one of Swift Fox's men had received during the initial confusion. Cooper and Whitehawk worked together, reading sign and planning the pursuit. Warner sent a rider back to the fort for reinforcements, not for battle, but for justice. Thomas watched it all, feeling the presence of the real Thomas Blackwood's spirit. This was what the dying soldier had seen possible. Enemies becoming allies, misunderstanding giving way to truth. "You did good here," Sarah said softly, appearing at his side. Her hands still bore traces of blood from treating the wounded. "Though for a moment there, we could have lost everything," he finished. "Peace is harder than war, takes more courage." She touched his arm gently. "Courage you've taught to others. Look at them." He followed her gaze. Cooper was demonstrating cavalry, hand signals to Whitehawk, while Matthew's wife was sharing water with Swift Fox's warriors. The canyon that had nearly become a battlefield was transforming into something else, a place where change was not just possible, but present. The bloodied bandana lay forgotten in the dust, its message no longer needed. The real bonds being forged here would be written in trust, not blood. The ceremonial staff caught moonlight along its length, eagle feathers and cavalry brass, mingling in an unprecedented fusion of two worlds. Old Bear had carved it himself, embedding Thomas's sergeant stripes into the ancient wood alongside traditional medicine symbols. Now it stood in the corner of Thomas's new quarters, a testament to how far things had come, and how far they yet might go. "Never seen anything like it," Cooper said, studying the staff's intricate carvings. "Apache symbols, but there's Christian crosses worked in too, and these brass pieces from fallen soldiers," Thomas explained quietly. "Not taken as trophies, but offered by their companions. Each piece tells a story of someone who died hoping for peace." The promotion to sergeant had come after the horse thieves incident, along with commendations for both Thomas and Cooper. But it was more than just a rise in rank. Captain Reynolds had created a new position, liaison between the fort and tribal leaders, with authority to negotiate on behalf of both sides. A knock at the door preceded Sarah's entrance. She carried a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with her precise handwriting. "The medical exchange program is working better than we hoped," she reported, settling at Thomas's desk. "Dr. Harrison says combining Apache fever remedies with Army medical techniques has halved the mortality rate." Thomas smiled, remembering the initial skepticism when he'd proposed having Apache healers work alongside the fort's medical staff. Now, trading knowledge saved lives on both sides. "And the training for the new scouts?" "White Hawk's group completed their cavalry drills today," Cooper replied. "They're faster learners than half our regular troopers." Lieutenant Warner actually smiled, thought his face might crack. Sarah began updating her records, adding notes about which tribal healers worked best with which army procedures. Her presence in his quarters would have raised eyebrows months ago, but now it was accepted as part of the new order. The fort was changing, adapting to a future few had imagined possible. "There's something else," she said, looking up. "A letter came from Division Command. They're sending observers next month. Apparently, word of our unusual arrangements has reached Washington." Thomas touched the ceremonial staff, feeling the smooth wood beneath his fingers. "They'll either see the wisdom in what we've built here, or they'll try to break it," Cooper finished. "But they'll have to go through all of us first." The young soldier's loyalty still humbled Thomas. Cooper had grown from a raw recruit into a skilled mediator, respected by both cavalry and Apache. For his willingness to learn and adapt, he wasn't the only one. Throughout the fort, more soldiers were learning Apache ways, while tribal warriors adopted cavalry tactics and protocol. Sarah closed her ledger. "The results speak for themselves. Raids have almost ceased. Trade is flourishing. Even the settlers are starting to see the benefits." She was right. The Matthews family had become unexpected allies after the horse thieves incident. Their ranch now served as a neutral meeting ground where settlers and Apache could trade and resolve disputes without military intervention. A distant drum began beating in the hills, not a war rhythm, but the gentle pulse of a healing ceremony. Thomas cocked his head, listening. "They're preparing for tomorrow's council, the one where you'll be formally recognized as a peace chief?" Cooper grinned. "Never thought I'd see the day when an army sergeant would hold Apache tribal rank." Thomas's hand went to his medicine pouch, touching the eagle feather bracelet within. The real Thomas Blackwood dreamed of this, even if he didn't live to see it. His sacrifice made it possible. Sarah stood, moving to his side. "You've done more than honor his name," she said softly. "You've created something entirely new." The ceremonial staff seemed to hum with potential in the corner, its merged symbols reflecting the change taking root in the territory. Tomorrow, before assembled tribal leaders and army officers, Thomas would take up that staff and accept the formal responsibilities it represented. "It won't be easy," he said, thinking of the Washington observers, of those on both sides who still clung to old hatreds. "Change never is." Cooper straightened, squaring his shoulders. "That's why you're not doing it alone, sir." The title carried weight now, earned through more than just rank or position. Thomas looked at these two who had become his closest allies, the soldier who had chosen truth over prejudice, the healer who saw beyond boundaries of race and culture. They represented the future he had glimpsed in a dying soldier's eyes. "When I first took his name," Thomas said, "I thought I would have to choose between worlds. Instead, I found a way to bring them together." He lifted the ceremonial staff, feeling its perfect balance. "Tomorrow, we take another step on that path." Outside, the healing drums continued their gentle rhythm, while inside the fort, the bugle called evening retreat. The two sounds merged in the desert air, no longer in conflict but in harmony, much like the man who bore a cavalry sergeant's stripes and an Apache peace chief's authority, and all those who had chosen to follow his lead. The letters from Virginia lay spread across Thomas's desk, their careful penmanship telling a story of love and loss that spanned a continent. Martha Blackwood, the real Thomas's mother, had written them over years, first to her son, then to the fort seeking news of his fate. Now she sat across from Thomas, her aged hands trembling as she held the last letter her son had written. "You found this with him?" she asked, her Virginia accent so like the one Thomas had learned to imitate. Beside her, Thomas Blackwood Sr.'s face remained stoic, but his eyes held desperate hope for answers. "Yes, ma'am," Thomas replied softly, along with his journal and personal effects. He touched the cavalry insignia at his collar, the one that had started everything. He spoke of you both at the end. Cooper stood guard outside the office door, keeping others away from this private moment. Sarah had offered to be present, but Thomas had known this conversation needed to happen without witnesses. Some truths demanded absolute honesty. "The Apache who was with him," Mr. Blackwood spoke for the first time, his voice rough with emotion. "The one mentioned in your reports. Did Thomas suffer?" Thomas felt the weight of his dual existence more heavily than ever. "No, sir. He was there to ease your son's passing. They spoke of peace, of a better way." Mrs. Blackwood's fingers traced her son's handwriting. These last entries, about the Apache people, he'd changed his mind about them, hadn't he? Saw them differently than we'd taught him. "Yes, ma'am. Your son had a gift for seeing beyond prejudice. In his final moments, Thomas paused, knowing his next words would change everything. He made a request, a dying wish that set in motion all that's happened here. The older man's eyes narrowed. "What kind of request?" Thomas stood slowly, moving to retrieve his medicine pouch. From it, he drew out something he'd carried since that day, a carefully preserved page from the real Thomas's journal, the last thing he'd ever written. "If any man reads these words," Thomas read aloud, "know that I die believing in the possibility of peace between peoples. The Apache warrior who holds me now has shown me more humanity than many who wear this uniform. I give him my name, my identity, in hope that he might succeed where I have failed." Martha Blackwood's hand flew to her mouth. Her husband stood. Abruptly, realization dawning on his weathered face. "You," he said simply. "You're him. The warrior our son trusted." Thomas met their gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. I took his name, not to deceive, but to honor his vision. Everything I've done here, the peace treaties, the medical exchange, the joint patrols, it all grew from his last wish." Silence filled the office. Thomas could hear the routine sounds of fort life continuing outside. Hammer strikes from the blacksmith, horses in the corral, troops drilling on the parade ground. All of it might unravel depending on how these two people responded to the truth. Martha Blackwood rose slowly, moving to stand before Thomas. Her eyes studied his face with motherly intensity. "Show me," she said softly. Understanding her request, Thomas spoke a few sentences in his native Apache, letting his true voice emerge. Then he drew up his sleeve, revealing the eagle feather bracelet. "Our son," she said, touching the bracelet gently, "he saw something special in you, something worth dying for. Worth living for, Martha, her husband corrected, joining them. Worth building something new for. He touched the cavalry insignia at Thomas's collar. You've worn his name with honor, son. More than that, you've given it new meaning. Thomas felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. I've carried letters for you too, he said, moving to his desk drawer. Things I wanted to tell you, but couldn't. About how your son's courage changed not just my life, but the lives of hundreds. About how his last act of trust began a transformation nobody thought possible. He handed them a packet of carefully written pages, his own letters to them, composed over months, but never sent. Martha took them with trembling hands. Will you tell us, she asked, everything? How you met him, his last words, what you've built from his sacrifice? And will you let us be part of it? Her husband added, not to replace what was lost, but to honor it by moving forward. Thomas looked at these two people, parents to the man whose name he carried, now offering to be family to the man he'd become. Outside his window, he could see Sarah and Cooper talking with Whitehawk, three cultures meeting in easy friendship. On his desk, the ceremonial staff caught afternoon light, its merged symbols telling the story of transformation. Yes, he said finally, I'll tell you everything, because you deserve to know how your son's last choice became a first step toward healing this territory, and because some families, like some truths, are chosen rather than born. The foundation. Stone bore markings from three cultures. Cavalry crossed sabers, Apache protection symbols, and a Christian cross, all carved with careful reverence. Thomas knelt beside it, adding the final touches to the Apache blessing symbols, while Martha Blackwood watched with quiet approval. The trading post rising behind them represented something unprecedented in the territory, a permanent settlement, designed from the ground up to serve both worlds. Your son helped place the first stone, Thomas told her, nodding toward Whitehawk, who was directing a mixed team of Apache and settler workers in raising the main beam. Said it was fitting since his father builds bridges in Virginia. Martha smiled, her face weathered but peaceful. Thomas Sr.'s never been prouder than when he drew up these plans. A trading post that's also a meeting hall, a medical center, and a place for both peoples to learn each other's ways. The settlement had grown from a simple idea, a neutral ground where commerce could flourish and understanding could grow. The Blackwoods had provided the initial funding, while Swift Fox's people contributed land and labor. Now, barely 3 months after breaking ground, the impossible was taking shape. "Sergeant," Cooper called out, approaching with Sarah beside him. "The Washington observers want to see you. They're with Captain Reynolds in the temporary office." Thomas touched the foundation stone once more, drawing strength from its solid presence. The observers had been at Fort Verde for 2 weeks, watching everything with calculating eyes. Their report would determine whether this experiment in cooperation would be allowed to continue. "Go," Martha said, patting his arm. "I'll make sure everything stays on track here." She had taken to her role as settlement coordinator with surprising skill, earning respect from both cultures with her practical wisdom. Inside the half-finished office, Captain Reynolds stood with 2 men in pristine Army uniforms, Colonel James Harrison and Major William Tucker from the War Department. Their expressions were unreadable as Thomas entered and saluted. "Sergeant Blackwood," Colonel Harrison began, "we've spent considerable time reviewing your unusual arrangements here." He gestured to a stack of reports. "Joint patrols, medical, exchanges, mixed settlements. It goes against every standard policy for dealing with the Apache." "Yes, sir," Thomas replied steadily, "because those policies weren't working. For either side." Major Tucker frowned. "You realize some in Washington see this as dangerous coddling of potential hostiles. Giving them access to military techniques, medical knowledge. They're giving as much as they're getting, sir," Thomas interrupted carefully. "Their hunting grounds have become our early warning system against raiders. Their healing knowledge has saved dozens of soldier and settler lives, and the raids have almost ceased. Because both sides have too much invested in keeping peace. Show them, Thomas, Reynolds said quietly. Understanding, Thomas drew out his medicine pouch. From it he produced carefully maintained records, lists of successful joint patrols, medical successes, trading profits that benefited both the army and the tribes. These numbers tell the story, sirs. But if you want to understand what we're really building here, he gestured toward the window. Outside, the settlement hummed with activity. Apache warriors worked alongside settler craftsmen, sharing techniques for building in this harsh land. Sarah moved between groups, teaching basic medical care to anyone willing to learn. Near the foundation stone, Martha Blackwood sat with a group of Apache women, all of them laughing as they shared stories while weaving baskets. "Your own mother seems quite comfortable here," Major Tucker observed. "Martha Blackwood isn't my mother by birth," Thomas said quietly, making a decision. "Just as Thomas Blackwood wasn't my name by birth. But some families, like some loyalties, are chosen." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Colonel Harrison's eyes narrowed. "You're saying—" "I'm saying that the real Thomas Blackwood died believing in this possibility, that enemies could become allies, that understanding could replace fear. I took his name to honor that belief. And everything you see here proves he was right." The sea. Revelation hung in the air. Captain Reynolds stood straighter, ready to defend his sergeant if needed, but before anyone could speak, a commotion outside drew their attention. A group of riders was approaching, settlers from the Murphy Ranch, escorted by a mixed patrol of cavalry and Apache scouts. One of the settlers was clearly injured. They watched as the patrol dismounted smoothly, Apache and cavalry troops working in practiced coordination to help the injured man. Sarah hurried over with her medical bag, already calling for specific herbs that blended Army and Apache healing practices. "That man would have died waiting for a regular patrol to find him," Thomas said quietly. "Instead, he'll be treated with techniques from both medicines, recovered in a place where both peoples work together, and probably end up trading with the very people he once feared." Colonel Harrison turned from the window. "You've given us a great deal to consider, Sergeant Blackwood." He put subtle emphasis on the name. "Whatever you were born, what you've built here." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Some might call it dangerous. Others might call it the future. I call it my duty, sir, to both my peoples, to the name I carry, and to the dream of the man who gave me that name with his dying breath." The foundation stone caught the late afternoon light, its carved symbols merging into something new, just like the community rising around it, and the man who had helped bring it into being. The dual burial markers cast long shadows in the setting. Sun, one a traditional Apache spirit pole adorned with prayer feathers, the other a cavalry cross fashioned from desert ironwood. They stood together at the head of the canyon where Thomas's journey had begun, where one man's death had sparked a transformation neither could have imagined. "This is where it happened?" young Thomas Matthews asked, his mixed blood evident in features that borrowed from both worlds. At 16, he wore both a cavalry cadet's uniform and an Apache medicine pouch, a living symbol of what the territory had become. "Yes," Thomas replied, touching the eagle feather bracelet that had never left his wrist. "I held him right here, where these markers stand. He was the first white man I ever met who saw me as a person, not an enemy." Sarah appeared beside them, their daughter Maria following close behind. At 12, she moved with her mother's grace and carried her father's quiet strength. Cooper and Whitehawk came next, their own children, two families merged through years of friendship, hanging back respectfully. "The Washington delegation approved everything," Cooper reported quietly. "The settlements officially recognized, the joint patrols, the medical program, all of it's being written into territorial law." Thomas nodded, but his mind was on the past, on the moment that had made all this possible. He drew out the cavalry insignia, worn smooth by years of handling but still carrying its power. When the real Thomas Blackwood died, he said to the gathered children, he gave me more than his name. He gave me a vision of what could be. Every person here is part of that vision's fulfillment. Maria stepped forward, touching the spirit. Umpole, gently, is that why you brought us here, Father? To show us where it began? Partly, Thomas smiled, but also to show you where it continues. He turned to young Thomas Matthews. You'll be the first cadet of mixed blood to enter West Point, and you'll carry both your heritages with pride. The boy straightened. The old ways and the new together, like you taught us. Like we all taught you, Sarah corrected, including everyone present. Each of us had to learn to see through new eyes. White Hawk, now a respected leader in both communities, spoke in the formal Apache way. The elders say that wisdom is like water in the desert. It finds its own path, but must be guided with care. Thomas looked at these families gathered in the canyon's growing shadows, Cooper's children playing with white hawks, Maria teaching young Thomas Matthews traditional Apache prayers while wearing her mother's cross. They were the future he and the real Thomas Blackwood had glimpsed in that desperate moment of death and promise. I've carried two names, he told them, walked two paths that became one. But you children are born to a world where those paths already meet. Your challenge will be to keep them from growing apart again. He knelt beside the burial markers, drawing out items he'd brought for this moment. The broken peace pipe, now carefully mended with silver bands. The brass mirror that had helped him maintain his deception until truth became strength. The medicine pouch that had carried healing from both worlds. These belonged to your journey, Martha Blackwood said, softly. She had insisted on making the difficult trip to this place to see where her son's last act had birthed something unprecedented. Perhaps it's time to pass them on. Thomas nodded, handling each item with reverence. The mended peace pipe went to young Thomas Matthews, a symbol of how broken things could be made stronger. The mirror he gave to Maria, who already showed signs of becoming a bridge builder like her father. The medicine pouch was presented to White Hawk's eldest daughter, who was studying both medical traditions under Sarah's guidance. But this, he touched the cavalry insignia at his collar, stays with me until I join the real Thomas Blackwood in the next world. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of courage don't happen in battle, but in moments of choosing peace instead of hatred. Sarah slipped her hand into his. Tell them what the Washington colonel said. Thomas smiled. He said that what we've built here might be a model for other territories, that sometimes the best traditions are the new ones we create together. The sun touched the horizon, setting the canyon walls ablaze with color. 20 years had passed since he had held a dying soldier in this spot. Now he stood surrounded by the living proof that death had not had the final word. Your generation, he told the watching children, won't have to choose between worlds like I did. Your challenge is to show that those worlds are stronger together than apart. The dual burial markers stood as silent witnesses to his words, their shadows now merged into one by the setting sun. In their joining, they marked not just a death that had happened here, but a rebirth that continued in each person present. The written history lay open on the library table of the newly established Territorial Academy, its pages containing carefully preserved documents from both cultures. On one side, official Army records detailed the transformation of the Arizona Territory. On the other, traditional Apache winter count hides recorded the same events in ancient pictographs. Together, they told a story that had become legend in two worlds. Professor Maria Blackwood, her father's daughter in both bearing and purpose, traced her finger along a particular entry. And so, she read to her mixed class of cadets and tribal youth, in the summer of 1875, a single act of trust between enemies became the seed of change. The students, children and grandchildren of those who had lived the story, leaned forward, though most knew the words by heart. It had become their founding myth, their explanation for why their community was different from any other in the West. The man who would become Thomas Blackwood held a dying soldier in his arms, Maria continued, switching smoothly between English and Apache as she spoke. But what passed between them was more than a name. It was a vision of possibility that would reshape our world. She turned to the modern photographs showing the thriving settlement that had grown from that first trading post. The images captured cavalry officers studying Apache tracking techniques, tribal healers working alongside, army doctors and children of both peoples learning each other's languages and ways. "My father carried two names, two traditions," she said, touching the eagle feather woven into her professor's braids. "He taught us that wisdom doesn't belong to any one people. It grows stronger when shared." Young Thomas Matthews III, now a lieutenant fresh from West Point, stood to add his perspective. The Academy's first graduating class included equal numbers from both cultures. Every officer commissioned from here speaks both languages, knows both healing traditions, respects both ways of seeing the world. The proof was all around them. The Academy's walls bore both cavalry pennants and Apache spirit shields. Its medical clinic combined traditional herbs with modern surgery. Its cavalry unit had evolved into a renowned peacekeeping force, their techniques studied by military observers from across the nation. "But the most important part of the story isn't in these books," Maria said, closing the volume carefully. "It's in how we live now, in how we've learned to see through each other's eyes." She led her students outside, where the afternoon sun illuminated a scene that would have seemed impossible 40 years earlier. Apache cavalry officers drilled alongside white scouts who had learned tribal ways. In the medical gardens, students of both peoples learned the healing properties of plants that had once been sacred secrets. Near the parade ground, tribal elders and army officers sat together in the shade, planning the next expansion of their unique community. "Your grandfather," one of the Apache students said to Maria, "he was born running river before he became Thomas Blackwood, wasn't he? We learned his Apache name in our histories." "Yes," Maria smiled, "and both names became honored by both peoples, because he taught us that identity isn't about choosing one truth over another. It's about finding the courage to embrace all truths that lead to understanding." A rider approached at an easy canter. Sarah Blackwood, now the Academy's chief. Medical officer, her hair silvered but her seat still straight and proud. "They're ready at the ceremony grounds," she called to her daughter. It was time for the annual remembrance, when both peoples gathered to honor those who had built this peace. They would speak the names of those gone ahead. Thomas Blackwood, both the original and the one who had carried his dream forward. Old Bear, who had first blessed the changing of names. Cooper and Whitehawk, who had proved that friendship could overcome prejudice. And so many others. But more importantly, they would celebrate what endured, the mixed families that had grown from those first tentative connections, the healing traditions that had merged and strengthened, the peace that had become not just a treaty, but a way of life. Maria gathered her students, leading them toward the ceremony grounds. Above them, an eagle circled against the desert sky, just as one had done the day a dying soldier and a young warrior had changed history with a shared vision of what could be. "We are all bridge builders now," she told her students, echoing her father's words. "Every time we choose understanding over fear, every time we see the world through another's eyes, we honor those who showed us it was possible." The legend had become living truth, written not just in books and on winter count hides, but in the daily lives of all who called this place home. Two peoples had become one community, proving that the greatest victories are won not on battlefields, but in the human heart's capacity to grow beyond the boundaries of prejudice and find wisdom in unexpected places.